It was not the noise that made me understand. No, it was the silence that followed. I prefer not to say my name, and after what happened at that roadside stop on Interstate 10, I learned a hard lesson. I learned that keeping certain things off the table is the only way to continue driving in peace. I've been driving across the southern part of this country for many years. I know every stretch of desert that seems to go on forever. I have heard engines blow up with a sound like thunder. I have heard tires tear, screaming against the asphalt. I have even heard transmissions die in the middle of nowhere, leaving a truck dead in the dust. But that silence was different. That silence had weight. It pressed against the windows. It filled the cabin like water. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The moon was hidden behind thin clouds. I pulled into an isolated rest stop in the deep desert of Arizona. It was one of those places that exists more out of state obligation than real activity. The lighting came from tall poles. They cast a weak, yellowish light onto the cracked asphalt below. The desert wind was blowing. It pushed fine sand against the sides of my trailer. The sound was like soft rain tapping against the metal. There were only 2 trucks parked there. They were far apart, very far apart. I chose the furthest spot possible. I always do. My cargo that night was not refrigerated. It was not sensitive. It was not flashy. It was just sealed pallets. All paperwork was in order. The weight was within the limit. There was nothing there that would warrant interest, nothing valuable enough to steal, nothing dangerous enough to fear. Or so I thought. I followed standard procedure. I locked the doors. I checked the mirrors, left and right. I turned off the engine. The great diesel motor slowed down. It rumbled, then coughed, then stopped. When the dashboard lights went out, an almost absolute silence filled the cabin. It was heavy. It was thick. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. That is when I heard it. The first bang. It did not sound like a punch. It did not sound like someone hitting the outside of my trailer. No. It was muffled. It was metallic. It was irregular. It sounded as if it were coming from inside another trailer. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I thought it was just cargo being adjusted. Sometimes boxes shift. Sometimes chains tighten. It happens. But the sound returned. This time, there were 3 short thuds. Thud, 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 followed by something dragging. A slow, scraping sound, like heavy fabric being pulled across a metal floor. I looked in the right rearview mirror. The glass was dark, reflecting only the interior of my cab. But beyond it, I saw the refrigerator truck. It was parked 2 spaces behind me. It was a large white box looming in the shadows. The detail that caught my attention was the lack of sound. The refrigerator was off. There was no constant noise from the auxiliary motor, no typical vibration of active refrigeration. Usually, a Reefer unit hums. It vibrates the ground slightly. You can feel it in your seat. But this one was dead silent. Yet, something seemed to be moving inside. I sat there, staring into the mirror. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Truck drivers see things. We hear things. The wind plays tricks on the ears. The heat plays tricks on the eyes. But the silence returned, heavier than before. It pressed against my eardrums, and I made a mistake. I decided to check. It was a small decision, a tiny choice, but it was the wrong one. I got out of the cabin with the wrong feeling. I felt like I was doing something I didn't need to do, something I should not do. The early morning air was dry. It was cold.
That fine desert chill that doesn't hurt your skin, but alerts your senses. It wakes you up. The gravel under the soles of my boots seemed too loud. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each step announced my position. It echoed in the empty lot. There was no movement in the other parking spaces, no doors opening, no engines starting, nothing. Just the wind and the sand and the stillness. I walked toward the refrigerated truck. I kept enough distance so as not to seem too curious. I walked slowly. I breathed evenly. The trailer was white. It had no logo. There were dust marks accumulated on the lower edges, brown streaks from miles of highway. The rear doors were closed. The seals were visible. Nothing looked forced open. Nothing looked broken. It looked normal. Too normal. I reached out and touched the metal side. It was cold, ice cold, but it didn't vibrate. A running unit always vibrates. This was just a block of frozen metal. I waited a few seconds. I stood in the absolute silence. I tried to catch any internal sounds. I held my breath. And that is when I heard it again. This time more clearly. 3 muffled blows, spaced out. Boom. Pause. Boom. Pause. Boom. It sounded as if someone was conserving energy. It wasn't the load pattern settling. Cargo does not knock with rhythm. Cargo does not wait. There was rhythm here. There was intention. My first thought was simple. Someone got trapped. Maybe a worker. Maybe a stowaway. Maybe someone who climbed in to sleep and the door locked behind them. It happens. People get locked in trailers every day. But my second thought came too quickly. This isn't my responsibility. I am a driver. I move goods from point A to point B. I do not solve mysteries. I do not rescue strangers in the desert at 2 in the morning. I looked around for the truck driver. The cab of the refrigerated truck was dark. The curtains were drawn tight. There was no sign of occupancy. No coffee cup on the dash, no jacket on the seat, no license plate indicating a large company, no visible identification. It was a ghost truck. It was at that moment that I saw lights appear. They appeared at the entrance to the rest stop, far away down the long driveway. A pickup truck pulled in. It moved far too slowly. It did not look like someone who just wanted to park. It did not look like a tired driver looking for a nap. It made a wide turn. It positioned itself behind my truck, not behind the Reefer, behind my truck. The engine remained running. I could hear the low idle rumbling through the night air. The high beams were on. They were fixed directly in my rear view mirror. The light was blinding. It washed out everything else. I didn't run back to the cab, and today I know that almost cost me dearly. I should have run. I should have sprinted. But I stood there. I stood between my truck and the refrigerated truck. I tried to appear indifferent. I tried to look like I was just stretching my legs. I tried to look like I belonged there. The pickup truck's engine remained running, steady, constant, as if waiting for something to happen, as if waiting for a signal. The high beams suddenly went out. The darkness rushed back in. but the vehicle didn't move. It sat there, idling in the shadows. That is when the feeling ceased to be just an impression. The feeling of being watched. It became real. It became physical. I could feel eyes on my back. The truck door opened slowly. It was a movement too controlled to be casual. It wasn't a jerk of the handle. It was a smooth, deliberate motion. A man got out. He was holding something long against his leg. He held it low, not in a threatening way, not waving it around, just holding it, ready. He closed the door slowly. Click. The sound was sharp in the silence. He began walking. He walked toward the back of my trailer. There were no shouts, no running.
No nervousness. There was method. Every step was placed with purpose. He knew where he was going. He knew what he was doing. I maintained a firm posture. My muscles tensed. I began to back away, toward my cabin. I measured each step. 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 He didn't say anything. He didn't quicken his pace. He just adjusted his trajectory. He moved to keep the distance the same. He was herding me like a dog herds sheep. When I reached the driver's door, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. It was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I climbed 2 steps at once. I grabbed the handle. I pulled myself into the cabin. I slammed the door shut. Slam! I immediately engaged the central locking. I heard the locks snap into place. Clunk, clunk, clunk. I turned the key in the ignition, almost reflexively. My hands were shaking. Before the engine had finished starting, I heard it. A sharp thud, right on the passenger window. Crack. The first blow didn't shatter it completely, but it created a web of cracks. They spread in seconds, like ice forming on a pond, white lines radiating from the center. Then came the second blow. It went right through. The glass shattered into the cabin. It made a violent sound. Crash. Tiny diamonds of glass glittering in the dim light. I felt small cuts on my arm, sharp stings as he tried to reach inside. He was trying to reach the door handle. The object he was holding was a heavy metal tool. It was not an improvised weapon. It was not a rock. It was not a stick. It was a tool designed for breaking. He knew exactly where to strike. He knew how to create enough space. He knew how to get in. I didn't have time to think about courage. I didn't have time to think about fear. I only thought about the sequence of actions. My training took over. Clutch pressed, key turned all the way. The diesel engine responded. It roared to life with minimal delay. Vroom! I kept my foot firmly on the accelerator. I released the parking brake. I engaged first gear. The man tried to force his arm through the broken glass. He couldn't reach the latch. His fingers clawed at the air, just inches away. The truck started moving. It moved the exact moment he lost his balance. He stumbled back. But the pickup truck behind me was blocking my front exit. It was positioned perfectly, a roadblock. So the only option was to go sideways. I turned the steering wheel sharply. I ignored the bad angle. I ignored the loose gravel. The trailer responded with a heavy delay. It dragged slightly. The tires skidded on the sand. Screech! Then it straightened out. I heard something hit the side of the cab, a dull thump, but I didn't stop to identify what it was. I didn't look. I didn't care. My only goal was to create distance. The pickup truck reacted quickly. It accelerated. It tried to close my exit angle. It moved forward on the left side. I was still adjusting the alignment of my vehicle. The truck's total weight provided stability, but it also limited any sudden maneuvers. If I misjudged the turn, I could end up sideways. I could get stuck. I could become completely vulnerable. I kept the accelerator steady. I showed no visible panic. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I was stone. I passed the rest stop exit. I almost scraped the low concrete curb. Sparks flew, but
but I didn't slow down. As soon as I reached the I-10 highway, I shifted into the next gear. I increased the revs. The engine screamed. The pickup truck tried to keep up. It stayed in the side lane for a few seconds. Its headlights were flashing intermittently. Flash, dark, flash, dark. Perhaps trying to disorient me, perhaps signaling to someone else. I maintained a straight line. I focused on the white line on the road. Left, right, left, right. After a few kilometers, the pickup truck slowed.
It fell behind. It disappeared in the rearview mirror. There was no long chase, no gunshots, no honking, just the calculated retreat of someone who didn't get what they wanted. They knew when to stop. They knew the risk was too high. I kept driving. I didn't slow down. I felt the cold wind enter through the broken glass. It mixed with the smell of dust and the smell of metal and the smell of my own sweat. I only slowed down when the mileage counter indicated a sufficient distance, a distance that made it impossible to catch me in a few minutes. 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles. The wind coming in through the broken glass started to really bother me. It brought in fine sand. It gritted against my teeth. It carried the dry smell of the desert. My arm burned from the small cuts. Blood trickled down my sleeve, but nothing was deep enough to compromise my driving. I could still hold the wheel. I could still shift gears. I could still drive. What really weighed on me was the question I avoided answering. What would have happened if I had opened that refrigerator? I kept thinking about the muffled thumps. I heard them before the truck came into the rest stop. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't the sound of loose cargo. It was a restrained rhythm, almost calculated, as if someone knew they couldn't draw too much attention. It didn't sound like a coincidence, and the synchronized arrival of the pickup truck made it all seem even less natural. It was a trap. If someone was trapped inside, the plan was simple and cruel. Create enough curiosity to force a driver to approach, force them to get out of the cab, leave the truck unlocked, leave the driver out of control. With the driver distracted, all that was left was to surround them and take over. It wasn't about the refrigerated truck. It never was. It was about my truck. It was about my cargo. It was about my paperwork and a quick disappearance into the desert. I had heard similar stories about crossing Texas, stories about crossing New Mexico, whispers in gas stations, tales over bad coffee, but I always dismissed them. I thought they were exaggerations. I thought they were myths. After that night on I-10, I stopped believing it was all just hearsay. Someone had planned the time. They chose the location. They counted on the desert's isolation. Nothing there seemed improvised. Everything was precise. When I finally pulled into a well-lit gas station, many kilometers later, I realized my hands were still tense. They were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. My fingers were cramped. The attendant asked about the broken window. He pointed at the jagged hole. "What happened there?" he asked. I simply replied, "Attempted robbery." Short, simple, final. I didn't mention the refrigerator. I didn't mention the banging. I didn't mention the silence. Some things are better left unreported. Some things are better left in the dark. I continued my journey after improvising a shield on the windshield. I used a piece of cardboard. I taped it up. It flapped in the wind. But the road seemed different from that night on. Everything had changed. Each stop required calculation. Each distant light gained significance. Was that a car, or was it a trap? Was that a traveler, or was it a hunter? The isolation that once represented peace became a variable of risk. Working across state lines has always involved exposure. We are alone on the road, but there,
It became clear. It became clear how much we depend on split-second decisions. One wrong move, one moment of curiosity, and it could all be over. Interstate 10 remained the same. The asphalt was the same. The desert was the same. But I didn't. I was different. I prefer not to give my name because I still pass through that area a few times a year. I have to. It is my job. I don't know if that refrigerated truck actually had someone inside.
I don't know if it was a person, or if it was all part of a larger scheme. Maybe speakers, maybe recordings, maybe nothing at all. I didn't go back to check. I didn't file a detailed complaint. I didn't try to investigate. My priority was to keep the cargo and stay alive. Sometimes surviving means accepting that you won't have all the answers. What remained was the pattern, not the violence, the muffled sound, the synchronized arrival, the calculated roadblock, the direct attack on the cabin's most vulnerable point. Nothing there seemed impulsive. It was cold, practical, functional. That is what bothers me most when I remember that early morning, the coldness of it. If you were listening to this now, you understand. You understand what it is like to depend on constant attention on the road. You know that many situations start out too small to seem like a real threat. A strange noise, a parked car, a flickering light. I almost turned curiosity into a fatal mistake, and it was a close call. That night didn't end differently only by luck, only by instinct, only by the grace of God. Take a second now. Breathe in slowly. Hold it, and breathe out. You are safe. You are in your room. You are not on that highway. The desert is far away. The silence is just silence. There is no one outside your door. There is no one watching. Just rest. Just listen to the rhythm of the words. Let them wash over you, like the wind on the asphalt, fading away into the dark.